Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. I'm Senator Johnson. We've got Bob Woodson with us today. Bob, it's so nice to have you in Utah. You're out here for a few days, and I'm glad you could stop in and talk to us.
I'm just delighted, as always.
It's been a little while since we've been able to sit down and talk, and I've been so curious about getting you back here because I want to tell a little bit about your story. So can you tell our audience a little bit about you and kind of how you made it to where you are today?
Well, I'm pleased to be here. I was born during the Depression, 1937, in a low-income black neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the youngest of 5 children. My dad was a veteran of the First World War. He was with the Harlem Hellcats.
The Harlem Hellcats?
Yes, they were the all-black unit that distinguished themselves in Germany. And he was injured as a result of that. And in 1946, he died as a result of his injuries and left my mother with a 5th grade education and 5 children to raise.
Wow.
And so but we lived in a strong neighborhood, all low-income people, but 98% of all households had a man and a woman raising children. Schools were solid. Everyone could read because in those days you had to read out loud. The schools were segregated and competent and very supportive.
So you felt like you got a good education growing up?
I really did. I mean, at least in these early days. And then as a result of not having a dad, I found it necessary to reach out to friends. But my mother gave me the kind of values that I selected good friends. One of those friends became Gordon on Sesame Street. People watching, Matt Robinson.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
We were in Cub Scouts together.
Oh.
And Matt's daughter is Holly Robinson, the actress who's married to Rodney Peake, the football player.
Oh.
So Matt died about 15 years ago, and so it was my first time being invited to Hollywood to eulogize him. And so I was the first time in Hollywood. So one of us made it out, but
yeah.
They were about 6 of us, so they were a year older than me. So when they graduated from high school, I was left unaffiliated. So I quit high school in the 11th grade and went into the Air Force in 1954. And I went to Keesler Field, from New York to Keesler Field, Mississippi. And a Polish friend of mine wanted to go in town to go to a bar. And we got the taxi cab on base. And as soon as we got outside the gate, he said, "I can take you or him, but not both of you."
Oh, really?
And it was my first introduction to really raw racism and segregation and separate bathrooms and restaurants. And so, but after the Air Force was really good to me, though. I had good training. I was in the space program. And I got my GED in the Air Force. And I took some courses in mathematics because I was in the space program at University of Miami. I had 12 credits when I could not walk on the campus because of my color.
Wow.
But the Air Force arranged to have extension courses on the base, fully accredited. And so when I got out of the military, I didn't have much confidence in my ability to learn. Thank God I didn't have affirmative action. Because I went to a small black college, 12 veterans.
What school was
it?
Cheney.
Cheney is the first black college in the country. And we were 12 veterans, horrible SAT scores. So we were admitted on 1 year's academic probation.
Wow.
But we came together.
But you studied math.
Studied math, yeah. And so I was always good at math. A's since the time I was in elementary school. But this school really nurtured us and taught us how to. We read our first book cover to cover as freshmen, and so and half of us made the dean's list at the end of the first year, even though we were all admitted on academic probation.
Wow!
Because we had the proper motivation.
Right.
And then.
And then they had high expectations.
High expectations for us. And then working in my undergrad, I had a GI Bill of Rights, but I still had to work full time. So I worked 12 hours. I worked at a juvenile jail for 8 hours from 4 to 12, and I went to school from 9 until 3. So I went a year round. But in working at the juvenile jail, I was working on a degree in math, but I found myself in this jail with 65 young people locked behind 3 doors, just 2 of us, and the kids were in there from gang murder to truancy. And I just fell in love with them because they were the same kind of kids I grew up with. And so I just had like a burning bush experience before I knew what a burning bush was.
Right.
The kids just applauded me one day because I collected money from other guards and took them in unsupervised areas of the prison so they could enjoy themselves. And 6 of them I would have adopted if I had the money. That's how much I felt. So the whole course of my life changed from going back, getting a degree in math and going back into the space program. So I dedicated my life to helping the least of God's children,
Yeah.
particularly the young.
Well, I noticed I was going through some of your books, and one of your early books is actually about juvenile corrections and stuff.
Yeah, I became very frustrated with how the formal child welfare system had been treating poor kids. And so I became very frustrated with how the formal system was treating children. And the poverty program in general. I became active in the civil rights movement, but I left the movement on the issue of forced busing for integration. That was something that I parted company also on a class issue, that we demonstrated outside of a pharmaceutical company for 3 months, and when they desegregated, they hired 9 black PhD chemists. When we asked them to join our movement, they said they got their jobs because they were qualified, not because of the sacrifices of people who were janitors and factory workers. So I realized that there was a huge bait and switch game going on where we used the demographics of one group of blacks as the bait. And when the money arrives from the federal government, the switch occurs. And my studies showed me that 70% of all the money, 22 trillion we have spent over the last 25 years, last 50 years, have gone not to the poor, but those who serve the poor. And we ask which problems are fundable, not those that are solvable. And so on those 2 issues of forced busing for integration that I was against, the opposite of segregation is desegregation. It is not integration.
Right.
And also bait and switch, where we created a commodity out of poor people. That's why poverty has increased or failed to decline as rapidly as he did from between at the end of the Second World War up to 1960. Black poverty was almost cut in half without government intervention at all. And then it slowed when the poverty programs came into existence and the government, we transferred authority for helping low-income people from institutions within the community to the federal government. We regulated out of the marketplace institutions that were indigenous to these communities that were more successfully helping people get out of poverty.
So let's talk a little bit. Several of your books actually address these issues, don't they?
They really
So
do.
you want to talk just a little bit about these different books that you've written? And
Well, one of my first books was called A Summons to Life. I wanted to, and I was intrigued that we are looking at the wrong places for the right answers. That this country of ours is built on a market economy, which means that only 3% of American citizens are entrepreneurs, but they generate 70% of the jobs. And that studies of entrepreneurs, they tend to be C students, not A students. I tell people A students come back to universities and teach, C students endow. Because smart people have to have all the answers before they act, and when they act, the opportunity's gone. C students, like myself, can make a mistake, fail, come back, fail, and the third time. And that's the entrepreneurial churning, the entrepreneurial spirit. And then that's what changed. Well, I believe the same occurs in the social economy, that only takes a handful of people to generate restoration and redemption within a low-income community. So my first book, I wanted to prove it. So I went into my hometown of Philadelphia to find out how the city of Philadelphia youth gang problem was an epidemic proportion in the late 60s and early 70s. And then it declined almost in 1 year from 48 to 50 deaths down to 2. I wanted to find out why and how. It's because of a social entrepreneur, a couple, the Falaka Fatah and her husband David, that had one of their 6 sons was a gang member. So they invited them to bring his friends home. So 15 boys came in. They stayed up all night. She says, I know nothing about gangs, but I know something about family. Move in with us. That's crazy. Well, they did. And these young men established with the House of Umoja Boys Home in the heart of the most gang territory. And when word spread that there was a sanctuary, a place of peace, these young men came in tremendous numbers over the course. She said, if we're all living here, we have to work, we have to be clean, we have to settle our differences. They retired her mortgage in 2 years.
Wow.
And then they purchased a house next door across the street. Within 4 years, they had 5 houses and 100 boys living there peacefully. And then they said, we want to take this to the whole city. All the black churches rejected them, everyone. The Quakers opened their facility at 4th and Arch. They had a citywide gang summit of active gang members, and they all came under the leadership. And I was blessed to follow them around for that period of time. In my first book, talk about how the Umoja promoted.
Was that the book that you co-authored?
No, the one, Summons to Life.
That was the one. Okay.
So I was able to go in, and this couple let me into their life. I sat in on sessions with the kids, and I was working with Peter Berger, my first conservative that I met, who as a sociologist guided this practitioner's research so that I could go in and inquire in a more disciplined way to uncover what are the dynamics of that change. How did she entice former gang members who did not have any respect for human life to say they now respect life? If you want to hold people responsible for their behavior, you cannot assume that they only respond to secular external incentives. James Q. Wilson says, if you increase the cost of crime by giving them harsher sentences, crime will go down exponentially. I challenged him. I said, in the world that I know, that's like threatening a kamikaze pilot with death.
Doesn't make sense.
In order to withdraw something, to threaten someone to withdraw, you first have to invest. So what Sister Fatah and her husband did was they helped these kids invest in themselves and believe that their life has value. And as a consequence, one recruited became a disciple to the other. And so I uncovered the secret sauce of how a high crime, drug-infested community can be reformed and redeemed from within. And so my book details the process that the Fatahs used. And now it equipped me with the understanding of how and who. So armed with that understanding, I went around the country looking for the Fatahs in different, and as my second book, Youth Crime and Urban Policy, A View from the Inner City, I was able to identify other fatahs in 7 cities, and I brought them together with 2 young people who they have redeemed. And I recruited some of my scholarly friends, only a few, who are secure enough with PhDs to sit and listen to untutored people. There are not many smart, wouldn't do that. But Dr. Robert B. Hill, Dr. Peter Berger, his wife Brigitte Berger, for 3 days at the Mayflower Hotel conference room, sat and listened to young people from around the country pour their hearts out and explained how and why they became redeemed. And the Vanderbilt Law Review gave me a very 6-page stellar review. And the reason they gave me such a stellar review is because Bob Woodson stayed out of it. Huh? Bob Woodson didn't create it, but I was a storyteller.
And you listened.
And I listened, and I learned. I was able to put my master's degree aside and listen with my heart.
So was this after you finished your master's?
Yes, after I finished my master's. I went to get a master's at the University of Pennsylvania because I feel it's not enough to love people. Sometimes love has to be administered in a more disciplined way.
And that master's is in
social work at the University of Pennsylvania. And it helped me a lot to love with discipline. And so that's how I was able to. But what I found fascinating is that from that time until today, I find myself a student of redemption and restoration.
Very good. We're going to take a break, and then we'll come back. Okay. Thank you.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today, because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We've got Bob Woodson with us, and you know, before the break, we were talking a little bit about, you know, kind of your background, your book, your master's degree, and you know, one of the things you mentioned that I found interesting was that you discovered that kids have to believe in themselves.
Absolutely.
And you know, that just made me think about this whole idea of this victim oppressor mentality that is being pushed so hard in our society, and we're starting to see it drawn back. But let's talk just a little bit about that.
I am a veteran of the civil rights movement, and I can tell you, conditions today, I think, are worse, not for blacks, but for the country, because of identity politics. Race has been so misused by people who are trying to undermine this nation. The biggest crisis we have isn't a race problem, we have a grace problem.
Yeah.
That's adversely affecting children of all races. According to a Harvard study, the leading cause of death of white, wealthy children in Silicon Valley is suicide. It's 6 times the national average. I attended a conference here a few years ago where there were 35 moms who lost their children to suicide. In Appalachia, the highest rate is death from prescription drugs and homicide in the inner city. That's not a race. So our children are growing up, whites are being told they're privileged and therefore victimizers, and black children, they are victims. And after a while, children begin to believe that perhaps they are unworthy, and therefore they devalue their life. And if you devalue your life, the consequence is you'll take yours or you'll take someone else's. They're different sides of the same coin. That's why what you all are doing here in Utah to challenge DEI and this identity politics is critically important to the nation. And that's why I'm just pleased to play some role in assisting you in eliminating it. We must become post-racial.
Yeah, fascinating idea. And you know, the other part of that you talked about, I think, this idea of grace. You know, one of the things that this whole postmodernist movement has done is it's eroded the idea of virtue in the curriculum at our universities, and you know, something else I'm working on is to bring back traditional liberal arts education, bring back the study of the great books, and bring back virtue.
There is a deep, deep thirst for it in the communities that I serve. And I'm telling you, I go in the most toxic communities. No one in the communities, we have 3,000 grassroots leaders in 39 states that the Woodson Center represents. These are the lowest income, the most troubled communities.
Well, is this what you call your Josephs?
My Josephs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you know what you were talking about before, where you were saying you've got these people, you know, like the couple you talked about that brought all the kids in, right? They're inspirational figures that are helping kids to believe in themselves. And when did the notion of them being the Josephs come to your mind?
When I was trying to think of a way to describe the relationship between the rich and the poor. And then when I read Joseph in the Bible, I said, those are the people, because Joseph in the Bible, as you know, there are two types of Josephs. From Genesis, he was blameless. He was a victim, truly a victim. He was betrayed by his family, falsely accused of attempted rape and imprisoned by Pharaoh, but yet he never became bitter. And also he was faithful to God even in the presence of all these trials and tribulations. And as a consequence, he then worked with Pharaoh and put into practice programs to elevate not only the family who betrayed him, but the Egyptians who enslaved him. But if it wasn't for the good Pharaoh, we wouldn't know about the Joseph. So we are recruiting good Pharaohs, wealthy, powerful people who are humble enough to reach beyond race and class and empower an uneducated Hebrew shepherd. And the other type of Josephs are those who were predators, who were drug addicts, but through God's grace have become redeemed. And so when we do at the Woodson Center, we go into low-income communities. We look for those two types of Josephs, people who are redeemed and restored, and therefore can be powerful witnesses to others that transformation is available. The other function that I think we can use today that conservatives need to be aware of, that if we want to convince people that the principles of our founders are worthy of respect and support, we're not going to do it by preaching to people about it. We have to witness to them. We have to point to the Josephs in this country whose lives and communities are being redeemed and restored by the embrace of the nuclear family, or belief in God, belief in the values of self-determination.
That's one of the things that's happened is we've taken God out of society. We've taken the founder's vision of this shared virtue of our economy. And I just...
Well, but let me just tell you, Ron, with thousands of grassroots leaders that I interact with every day, they're not confused about their pronouns. They believe in the nuclear family. They believe in self-determination. But the qualities that make them effective makes them invisible, because they're not whining and complaining. They're not demonstrating. You're going to have to be like a Geiger counter and go in and find them, because they're not looking for you.
Well, I know you're working with some groups here in Utah.
Absolutely.
You worked with Path Forward Utah, Jamie at Path Forward, and now you've got this Hope of Utah organization that you're working with Ron Williams on, and some of the great volunteers that we have here.
Absolutely. When I spoke here at Weber State, I had Ron and a panel of people on the stage. This is the same audience that Nicole Hannah-Jones spoke.
Right, yeah. I remember you came after Nicole Hannah-Jones came here to talk about 1619.
Right.
You came in and talked about, in fact, you've got 2 books out that really counter her argument.
But you know what made my presentation effective was the grassroots leaders who were sat on that stage as respondents to my speech. So when they were shaking their heads, when they agreed with the principles that I was espousing, it provided a different messenger. See, conservatives have to be, they're tone deaf when it comes to the messenger. And it's important that to have people to validate you. And that's why I think you were able to get the legislation passed, because it was supported by the likes of Ron and grassroots leaders. Therefore, your messenger was reinforcing an important message.
You know what's interesting with that legislation that got passed is that Weber State, which is where you were, President Mortensen there basically said, look, we're going to go full speed with this, because the legislation only said you have to treat everyone the same.
Right.
We didn't take away the funding. We basically said, we want you to set up centers for student success and focus on the success of all your students. And lo and behold, Weber State did that.
But you took action. That's a ground game. See, the left has an excellent ground game. The conservatives do not have a ground game. But when you did develop a ground game, look what happened.
Yeah.
But you also opened it up for these grassroots leaders to make input. And so you were seconding what they said, not them seconding what you said.
Right. You know, we're about out of time, but can you give some advice to people in Utah?
Yes.
Because I think there's
People
still some
in Utah,
divisiveness
know,
about this issue, but
you have in Utah a rich array of grassroots leaders that Jamie Renner has found, that the Woodson Center is supporting. We need to fund them. We need to, if the Democrats can raise $1 billion in 3 months to lose an election, if a fraction of the money that we're taking to give to think tanks and give to political campaigns, if we could take a fraction of that and invest in these grassroots leaders, because their actions embody the values of our founders. And if you want to recruit people to those values, demonstrate to them that it improves the quality of the life of the least of God's children. And so that's what I would recommend that you, and I'm trying to do everything I can to convince people here with wealth and with foundations and gifts to give, to supporting grassroots leaders should be a priority, so that if you stand for the values of the nation, then invest in the people whose actions embody those values in the work that they do to revitalize low-income communities. And then just what you did, when the time comes for a public presentation of it, stand with them. Don't speak for them. Let them speak for themselves. That's what I would recommend.
very good. Bob Woodson, thank you so much for coming in, and we'll see you guys next week.